All right. Hey there, folks. We were on a much needed break to recharge. So welcome back to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster Season 10. Intriguing interviews with creative minds. I knew I wanted to start off the season with a bang. So please welcome tonight's guest, one of the greatest sci-fi authors of all time, JOE HALDEMAN. A winner of both the Hugo Award and Nebula Award, Joe was also a SIFWA Grand Master and was an MIT professor for more than 30 years. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, glad to see you.
All right. Okay. Just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions you have for Joe in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, Joe, as we always do, we'll start at the beginning. Where were you born and where'd you grow up?
Born in Oklahoma City and grew up all over the place. Mostly Alaska and down in Bethesda, Maryland, and over in Iowa, and I don't know, here and there.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about that. So, how old were you when you moved from Oklahoma?
Only
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Oh, okay. So you were just all right. So you were technically born there, but never really lived there.
It's not that I didn't like it, but
you gave it a shot. You figured, all right, been there, done that.
Yeah, right. Thought I'd try the East Coast. Yeah.
Okay. So you moved around a lot. You said mostly Alaska. Where in Alaska?
Anchorage, basically, and we traveled around a bit because one does, but this was back in the 40s. So
right.
Alaska was actually is part of the Cold War, on the edge of combat zone, because we had a lot of Air Force activity and so forth. And my father was an officer, and yeah, it was all very exciting, actually. Although as a kid, I didn't think of things being exciting. It was just
how it
like,
was.
yeah.
So you were in Alaska from what ages about?
Oh, very young, from kindergarten through third grade.
Third grade. So could you see Russia from your house?
No, no.
Just kidding.
We couldn't see shit from my house.
So what was it like? So, it's funny. My son was just telling me the other day, he's just a wealth of knowledge. He's only 12 and he seems to know a little bit about everything. He's like, you know how big Alaska really is. So how big is Alaska really? I mean, because most of us don't have a real good sense of it because it's so far away from, most of the country.
Try 5 time zones. That's a big state.
Yeah.
And well, if you look at it, it depends on the kind of projection that you use, but it's really bigger than Texas. It's just a huge old thing. But actually, it's when you look at the parts of Alaska where people can actually live comfortably, it's not that huge. It's
right.
It's I'd say it's like a Midwestern state with a lot of territory.
Right. So there's obviously, because it's such a large landmass and you are north, and obviously a lot of Alaska gets a ton of snow. Was Anchorage like that or not really?
It has varied a lot in this century, but it used to be Anchorage got a lot of snow. I remember, we were just socked in all the time, but starting in the 60s, it has gotten warmer and warmer.
Right.
Part of global warming, but more extreme.
Right.
It seems to me that it hardly ever snows in Alaska now, but the people who have to drive through it probably.
Right. So when you were, was it just you? Did you have brothers, sisters?
I had my brother and my father and mother, and we were a pretty close-knit family group.
Okay. And your dad was in the service, you said, correct?
Yes and no. I mean, he was an officer, but he was an officer in the public health service. So it's not like it was semi-military.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Was that why you moved around, because his jobs took him this way and that?
Oh, definitely. I think from the time he was out of undergraduate work, actually, he started moving around, and he was all over the place.
So you were there, you said, until about third grade. So that was, so you were, what about, I don't know, 10 or so?
Yeah, yeah.
So what was it like being, so at that time, I mean, I know when you're young, you typically have no sense of scope kind
Right.
of the world, right? You just kind of know, where are my toys? Where,
Yeah.
right? Where are my closest friend? And then maybe, the block or two around you. But did you have a sense then of just the geographic mass that was Alaska at that time? Or was it just sort of beyond you at that age?
I think in a way you couldn't ignore it. For instance, we had to rely on the shortwave radio. There was no television, of course. This is back before that.
Right.
There was a sense that the enemy was out there all the time, and we had blackouts. The whole town, the whole city would have to turn off all the lights and just sit there and shut up.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, at that age, did you feel was there a sense of, was it of danger, of this ominous sense, or was it more like, as a kid, more like, oh, it's an adventure?
Yeah, as a kid, you say, wow, this is great. We're going to do this again. Can we do it next week too?
Right.
Yeah. Are they going to run out of bombs? I don't know.
So when that happened, was this during World War II, or was this post?
No, it was Korean War.
Oh, Korean War. Right. Okay. So there was really was there ever any real threat?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there was the actual contact with the enemy was only sporadic here and there, but the threat of a massive invasion was always there, and that was the problem. I mean, the thing is, Alaska was sort of a frontline combat. If the Soviets and the Chinese invaded, Alaska would be the first to go. I mean, just in the first minutes of the war, they'd be dropping bombs on Alaska, maybe atomic bombs in those days.
I guess I never really thought of it like that. I mean, because most of us, the US was never outside of Pearl Harbor, and until 9/11, there was no actual enemy combatants on US soil
Right.
at least that we knew of. So there were actually Korean soldiers attacking Alaska back in the 50s. Is that right?
Oh no, not like that. But they were ready, and they were near days from invasion.
Really?
So yeah, it was.
Huh. I never.
But it's the thing is, this is subject to political interpretation.
Right.
Because what were they really going to do? I mean,
Right.
we were a great big country with atomic bombs, and they were a little country with attitude. So
Right. I guess we don't see. So if I understand my geography correctly, so Anchorage is really kind of in the on the south, right, of Alaska,
yeah,
kind of in that arch,
yeah,
right? But I guess you don't realize, especially being here. So I'm in New Jersey right now and grew up in New York. Anchorage is, I don't know, got to be 5,000-6,000 miles away, something like that.
right, yeah.
So you don't realize that I guess in Anchorage, you were closer to, I guess, Russia than you were to New York.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure.
Wow. So that's interesting. I never really put that together. I guess it's something I've never heard anyone talk about, the idea that if you were, in Alaska, that, hey, the enemy compared to the rest of the US, they're not that far away. They could get there if they wanted to.
Yeah, right. Well, that's of course, and that's the difference growing up in wartime.
Right.
Back in the day. I mean, now, in a sense, we're always in wartime. We're
Right.
always only minutes away from enemy action, no matter where you live.
That's right. But back then, though, that we didn't have that same, the idea of warfare has changed so fundamentally over the last, 60, 70 years. Huh. Sorry. So you were in Alaska. So your brother, are you older or younger than your brother?
Younger, 18 months.
Okay. And you said you guys were close. So so after Alaska, where did you guys go?
Well, we moved up to Washington, DC. Actually Bethesda, Maryland,
Okay,
suburbs of Washington,
right.
and lived there until college.
Oh,
So
okay. So you went from, being hypothetically in the sights of the enemy
yeah,
to the political to the to the political center of America.
yeah,
Did
quite
you
so.
was what did you have a sense of it? Because I've talked to a couple of other folks who grew up in, kind of in the DC area, and I've asked them the same question. And they had told me that mostly they felt they didn't really feel the politics was sort of like that was sort of off in the city, kind of like where the grown-ups did their things and I was just living my life. Did you
Yeah,
sense that, or was it there? Did you feel like, wow, the White
I,
House, not that it's, 20 miles, it's 20
yeah,
minutes
it
away.
depends. I think when you're a kid, a lot of it depends on what your parents do.
Right.
My father was a government official, and he was a general, or no, he was a colonel at the time.
Mm,
And I we were very much involved in the military and the government.
right.
Oh, and everybody we knew was in the service.
Right. So
So,
how did that affect your worldview growing up in, in that in those environments?
well, it was kind of hard to get Kool-Aid. I didn't have a worldview. I was a kid.
Right.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
we were somewhat conscious that our life was peculiar.
Right.
So the military situation. And we did have like air raids and blackouts and that kind of stuff. So we were constantly reminded that there was a war going on and we were on the front lines,
Right.
but rarely felt any danger. Sometimes we'd have military maneuvers that would, like our across the street, a plane came down so low that its landing gear knocked the chimney off our neighbors.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so it's kind of, uh-oh,
Whoops.
what's going to happen next? What
Right.
happened next was nothing.
So when you were a kid though, so all right, so in Alaska, you were in this giant state and you had a couple of like, oh, hey, the lights are out. Okay, and you did your thing, then you moved to DC. So as a kid, what were you into? Like what kept you busy?
As a kid, I was just doing kid stuff. I guess we did a lot of nature. My brother and I both,
Right.
filled with animals and lab stuff and had fun. I think in Alaska, I started to become fascinated by astronomy.
Right.
And by the time we moved up to Washington, that was my main love.
Well, because you must have been able to, I'm assuming, especially from Alaska, so far away from, even though back then, in the 40s, 50s,
Yeah.
pollution wasn't like it is today, and especially being out there, I'm assuming you must have had some absolutely unbelievable views.
Well, I wasn't aware of them. I've got to say,
Really? Huh.
it's pretty dark in Alaska.
Right.
And I was mostly aware of storms and I wasn't aware of the night sky that much.
Huh.
Because it
Really?
was really just sleet and snow
Right.
and
Oh, I get. So was it really, was the climate really that severe?
seemed to be. Yeah, well, that was a more, oddly enough, in a peculiar way, it was a more primitive time. And
Right.
you kind of bundled up and
Battle
you know,
the elements.
nowadays Alaska is more civilized than Florida.
Yeah, but what isn't though?
Say
So.
about that, yeah. But yeah, I was so glad that as I grew up, I was glad to have had the experience of growing up in Alaska. Because it was kind of-
Why is that?
Well, if I had said, son, you're gonna be a science fiction writer, you better start out someplace fucking weird. And so, I said, well, then could I go to Alaska?
right, so talk to me about that though. So I mean, I understand, conceptually, right? It's a massive, massive state. You were, like you said, there was always this, maybe outside threat of, hey, we could be attacked. We probably won't, but it could happen.
Yeah,
Lots of harsh weather. So, but what else made it in your mind weird? Like what was put
we had
me there?
we had wild dogs and wolves attacking the suburbs, and we lived in the suburbs,
Right.
and that was interesting. I mean, we would go out. The adults would go out with rifles and kind of, not often, but every now and then you just have to go protect yourselves.
So a little bit of the Wild West.
We didn't think of it that way. This was definitely Alaska.
Right. I just meant sort of the
Oh, no, I know what you mean.
like
But
a
in fact,
frontier.
we had some of that, especially kids,
Right.
because people walk around with guns on the street
Right.
because you might need one. I mean, it's not a gun against, bandits and so forth.
Right.
So,
Right.
but it's a gun because, for Christ's sake, it's Alaska. You carry a gun. I mean,
Just
nowadays it sounds political, but it wasn't political in those days. It was just kind of,
how
you
it
never
was.
can tell what's going to happen, so you've got a gun.
So all right, but you say that though, you never know what's going to happen. So give me some of the what could have happened then that was sort of unique to where you were.
Well, we were aware of things going haywire. Partly it's because of the climate in Alaska was much more extreme then than it is now, than it has been for 40 years. But we'd have, everything would freeze solid, and then you'd have sleet and
Right.
and then everything would thaw, and then it'd freeze up again. And
Right.
it was all, for a kid, it was just really cool because you never knew what was going to happen.
Right.
For adults, it wasn't so cool.
Right. Lots of, actual legitimate daily hardships to just sort of battle through.
Yeah, and everything was busting all the time. The car would stop working, and
Right.
when the car stops working in sub-zero weather, it's life-threatening.
Right.
And the heat in the house would stop, or like the car burst into flames in the garage. That was interesting.
Wait, that happened at your house?
Yeah.
Oh, so I mean, did it burn the garage down? Did it burn your house? Like what happened?
My father pulled the emergency brake and pushed the car out of the garage.
Wow. Quick thinking.
Yeah. Well, he was a quick thinking man. And he was quite an interesting fellow. So
How so?
well, he had a lot of education, but you never get a clear picture of your father,
Well,
and
that's for sure.
you never give him the respect he's due, of course, because he's dad. Oh God. Yeah. But yeah, he was he worked huge, just killer hours, and under very extreme conditions. And he traveled a lot. I mean, he flew out to Fiji, for instance, and that's quite a distance from Alaska.
Sure.
And he was in charge of a couple of far-ranging things in the public health service, which the public health service was not what it is now. It was it was one of the branches of military.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it isn't, it no longer is, but it was at the time.
So what was he overseeing? What was he actually doing?
He was in charge of state services, which was a broad part of the public health service. It just basically whatever anybody else wasn't doing, he had to go out and do it. And he did have defined things going on, but see, for instance, he was in state services, but Alaska was not a state. Alaska was a territory, which is a profound difference.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right. What year did Alaska officially become a state? I don't remember.
52, I think. I'm not sure.
Right.
It
Okay.
was after we left.
So what, he was sort of like a high level jack of all trades?
I guess you would characterize it that way, but I don't know. He was a bureaucrat, but a bureaucrat with an awfully loose set of
Oh,
responsibilities.
wow. Okay. So I want to jump ahead a little bit. So I was born in May of 1971, right smack in the middle of the Vietnam War. I've talked
Wow.
about this before on the show, but I remember seeing, even as a little kid, I remember seeing the troops on TV and Walter Cronkite. And though I didn't really understand then the magnitude of what that war had on the U.S. and the world, I certainly, my dad ironically says, well, you probably didn't really know what was happening. You were probably picking up on things going on around the house, but it wasn't that. I felt the magnitude, whatever it was, and I didn't really understand it, but I just felt it, right? It just sort of seeped into my world, and I felt like a little bit of the darkness and the sadness and the tension. Were you drafted or into the war, or did you enlist? What happened back then?
Well, I was drafted, like a lot of people in my situation. The thing is, I had a degree and I had a lot of education. I had 6 years of college when I got drafted. And so I had advantages that other people didn't have. But I also was not very smart about using my advantages.
Mm,
And I was very sensitive of the fact that my father was a high government official.
right.
And he did not want me to use that to my advantage as a soldier, and I didn't want to do it either.
Mm,
So when I was in Vietnam, people were saying, "Your father's a fucking general.
right. What are you doing
What are
here?
you doing here?"
Right.
And all I say is, my father's a general, but he's also an honorable man.
Right.
And I didn't ask for any special treatment, and he wouldn't have given it to me if I asked for it. And
So,
his father was not a right wing, kind of weirdo uh, military guy. He was a doctor with a lot of responsibility for a lot of people,
right.
and he chose that odd profession.
So you said though just a few minutes ago you that you hadn't been smart about your position, but then you're saying that even had you asked for favors, you wouldn't have gotten it. So if you had a do-over about that time, I mean, how would you have maneuvered yourself differently?
Yeah.
Or would you
Well,
have?
I don't know. See, if I wanted to be an astronaut. I
Oh,
didn't want to be a soldier.
right,
Soldier was the last thing I wanted, but
right,
the selective service was there, and I would never be an astronaut if I had dodged the draft.
right,
See, my friends are saying, "What are you, fucking stupid? You can get out of this."
right,
I could have gotten out of it. There are all kinds of things you could have done, but what you had to do was sell your soul.
right,
That's or rent it out.
right.
And yeah, I'm not a tremendously moral person, but I have a few morals tucked in here and
A
there.
few, a few, a few. Okay.
Yeah. And I saw people going off to Vietnam because they didn't have educations, because they
Right,
didn't have white skin
right,
and all this stuff. And I thought, well, I'm just going to see what happens. I'm just not going to pull any strings.
right.
And so I was zipped off to Indochina.
Wow.
So, I I
Where,
don't,
where in
I don't,
China did they send you?
well, just straight to Pleiku in Vietnam.
Mm,
And I went a few places because that's the way they handle people.
right.
But I basically stayed in the jungle
Wow.
in Vietnam. And then I was wounded and wound up in Cam Ranh Bay, uh, where I did not, I don't know, I didn't manipulate things. If I had been smart, I could have gotten straight sent back to Washington, D.C. because I was legitimately wounded. I was just, full of holes.
Oh, geez.
But I played it by the book, and I wound up, taking advantage where I could. So I wound up in Vietnam handing out games to soldiers in a hospital.
Really?
Yeah, but the hospital was under attack all the time, and
Right.
people getting killed all around me and that sort of thing. So it was not a very easy duty.
Right.
It was very interesting. I met all kinds of neat people.
Right.
And for a guy who had no, very few molecules of patriotism to rub together, I kept my nose clean. I did what I could do.
Right.
And I tried to help the soldiers,
Right.
because after all, they were in the same boat as I was. Not a boat, we'd be sailors if we were, no, but so I don't know. I knew at the time, this is one of the most important things I would ever do as a writer. So I kept my eyes open and I wrote everything down. I wrote to Gay every day. So we have this like 300 pages of letters that I wrote, were mostly handwritten, some typed on my little.
Do you still have them?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow. Do you ever go back now? I mean, now and look at them?
Every now and then I take them out and flip through, and just a weird time trip.
What does that do for you? I mean, to see something, a letter that you wrote back in, 1972 or whatever it was, and something that happened 50 years ago. Like, what does that evoke? Is it hard to do? Is it just sort of weird? Like, what is that like for you?
Not emotionally hard, but it is kind of disorienting to go, Jesus Christ, I can only barely sympathize or empathize with the person who was there, because my circumstances are so different now.
Right. Huh. So let me ask you, when you got drafted, you were there. I mean, obviously you were wounded, and there's no good or fun way for that to happen. Did you feel at the time that the war was worth fighting, or was it just something that, they're just making me do this nonsense and just get me the hell out of here?
I never once thought the war was worth fighting.
Right.
I mean, I went over there as protesting, atheistic, not very patriotic, just slob who got in the way of the war machine.
Right.
I was like almost all the guys around me. I mean, you couldn't find 3 people to put in a room who would be in favor of the war, and out of thousands, every now and then you'd find somebody who was in favor of the war and say, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Right. Actually, sorry.
They were all treated as
so I did my own protesting.
Yeah.
I was about 3 years old. So I was at that big rally on Long Island back where Ronnie Kovacs was. My parents were there, and they took me in the stroller, and I was out there. So I was protesting at 3.
Great.
So some soldiers struggle more than others when they reacclimate into civilian life. And unlike in most every other US war before that time, soldiers then, generally speaking, were not treated with the reverence that they typically had been in the past. And some were treated quite badly. What was it like for you to come back into civilian life? I mean, was that difficult for you?
For me, it was really pretty easy.
Okay.
I was a science fiction fan.
Right.
Science fiction fans mostly were against the war.
Right.
But they were not against soldiers.
Right.
And so when people came back from the war, they were all, well, I'm glad you survived, and now let's get back to business.
Right.
The business being fanzines and
right.
that kind of thing.
So let's go ahead.
I was lucky.
So let's talk about that. When did you first really? When did you? So you're taking notes. You're in Vietnam. You've had some pretty harrowing experiences. You're dealing. You're helping soldiers stay occupied as they're trying to recuperate while bombs are going off around you. You started taking notes. When did you really? Did you know at that point? The only thing I want to do, because I'm assuming at that point you figured that probably being an astronaut maybe wasn't going to happen at that point.
Yeah. Well, I knew it wasn't. Yeah.
Right. So did you know then that this is what I want to do? I want to be not just a writer, but a science fiction writer. Did you know that then?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't. I knew that I would be writing science fiction. I didn't know that that's all that I would do. I still thought that I probably have to get my PhD and all that crap,
Right.
and get jobs and professorships and all that stuff.
Right.
And then, well, I sold my first story right after I got back from Vietnam, really. And I sort of just slid down the rabbit hole from there.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I made some sort of token gestures toward getting an honest living someplace, but I knew definitely my heart was not going to be in it.
I hear you. So your experience has certainly shaped what became an incredible writing career. And, I read the Forever War actually not that long ago. And even though it's a future set novel, I could feel very strongly let's call it the Vietnam-ness of it. Can you tell me a little bit, what was it like to put to paper a novel about war, and in particular, kind of your experience of that war? Because the way you wrote that novel, it really did feel like a miracle that anyone survived.
Yeah, well, that's the way, that's sort of the way writers do their lives. I mean,
Right.
you sort of over dramatize it and say, oh my God, nobody can look through this. However, I've got a pencil. So I'll write as long as I can,
Right.
And people tend to put their lives into structure. So they make sort of stories out of things that really are just random crap. And I didn't, a writer may be more conscious of doing it than other people.
Right.
But I knew, of course, from the time I stepped on the plane, I was taking notes. So I was a writer then.
Right.
And I thought, well, this is shit, but I'm gonna make the best I can of it.
Right.
I took voluminous notes all the time, and I kept them all. And then I mailed them off to Gay, and she kept them in chronological order.
Wow.
Cool.
Wow. And you were able to get all your notes out, no problem. Nothing got, lost. And
The Army didn't keep me from anything.
no, I guess more I meant was just given the conditions of being in Vietnam, I mean,
Oh yeah,
it wasn't like you were staying at the Hilton.
no, the Hanoi Hilton, maybe.
Maybe, right?
Yeah. I lost a few pages here and there,
Okay.
but by and large, I kept everything. And when I lost individual notes, I'd rush to, while I could still remember what I'd written, I'd write it over again.
Right. So when you wrote the Forever War, did you have a sense at the time that, so you write it, how long did it take you when you said, okay, I came back, you had notes and you sat down? Was it easy to write? Was it a challenge to bring those experiences into some sort of narrative? Like, how was that for you?
I would say that compared to other kinds of writing, it was relatively easy. I had to write it while I could, before the memories faded, I had to get that down.
Right.
And so I was writing with a certain amount of passion.
Right. Was it cathartic in any way to sort of kind of get that out onto the page? Did it help you sort of let go of some of what you'd been through?
Well, conventionally, you'd say yes, of course.
Right.
Although in the process, I didn't feel that way. In the process, I felt some of it was very difficult to write down.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Remember, relive.
Right. It couldn't have been
I
fun.
also had to, I guess this is almost anybody's experience with writing about a difficult thing. You don't like reliving it, but
Right.
you have to do it, or otherwise the experience has lost its value.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So just a quick,
It's not something that's unique to soldiers or even people who've had traumatic experiences.
right. That's right. So just a quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, send them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. All right. So I understand you did a little writing. We're going to jump ahead a little bit. You did a little writing for Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, okay. Star Trek started right after I got drafted.
Mhm.
And I knew about Star Trek when I was on the way to Vietnam. I actually read some fanzines and stuff like that.
Right.
But I was not gung-ho about it. I didn't know much about it. And I guess I was vaguely aware of it during that year I was in Vietnam. And when I came back, the science fiction was going crazy about Star Trek.
Right.
And I flung myself back into science fiction as a sort of a cure for combat fatigue. It's like,
Right.
oh God, here's my home is back, my world is back.
Right.
And so Star Trek was part of that, but not a truly overwhelming part of it. I mean, I was more in the kind of Chip Delaney, Roger Zelazny kind of science fiction.
Right.
Star Trek had a bad kind of a connotation in that it was commercial and predictable and
Right.
all kind of, well, it's spoiled by television. It's touched by the boob tube, and so what can you say?
Huh. So what did you actually write? What Star Trek did you write?
I wrote 2 novels in the Star Trek universe, and because of the nature of things, the way they're done, you are in contact with Paramount
Right.
at the time, and they give you this big handbook on all this crap, and you try to write around it. And it depends, there are a couple of approaches, and some people just automatically jumped into the wage slave kind of thing,
Mhm.
and turned out novel after novel after novel.
Right.
I resisted it, not out of any nobility or anything, but kind of lazy. I wanted to write my own books, but I
Right.
wanted to get Star Trek money.
Right.
Well, the thing is, my first novel, which was not science fiction, was very well received critically.
Mhm.
Didn't make much money, but I was a real writer, and I had academic creds and the whole thing,
Right.
and so I was in a way, I loved science fiction, but I didn't love where science fiction was vis-a-vis being a writer.
Why?
Well, I worked hard to be a literate and literary guy, and science fiction was working hard against that. Science fiction wanted you to be a science fiction writer, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be a writer who wrote science fiction.
Hmm.
And so the difference is not subtle, even though the books that result from that attitude aren't necessarily that different.
Right.
But the life that you live is rather different.
Okay.
Now, okay, one difference between this idealized Joe Haldeman, the academic guy, and that was that Gay is a very sociable and social person. And so she became a science fiction fan with a capital F, capital SF. And so she had all the connections and all the sort of social power
Right.
I didn't have, because basically shy guy. I give me a fountain pen, and
Right.
I'm a typewriter if I have something that needs to be typed.
Right.
Uh, yeah, and I'm not a big social guy, or I was not
Right.
at that point. Although I've become social and sociable as a sort of protective coloration or something. I can pass for human.
All right. Well, we won't tell.
Yeah, right.
Huh. So I understand that a little bit later on, you had one of your works was adapted for the new Twilight Zone.
Oh yeah.
So which one? What was this? What was the story? What was about? And what was that like?
That was fun. It was a huge amount of money for the day. I mean,
Right.
it's like $1,500, and That was for 2 days work.
Not a bad gig.
Yeah, even now, that's not a bad gig, but
Right.
at the time, that was just like the second coming, and you had a season pass for that
Right.
day.
Did you?
And it changed me as a writer because it changed how the world saw me as a writer.
Really? Talk to me about that.
Well, I would, that's one story,
Right.
and what, less than a week's work.
5 minutes.
Yeah, Gay says 5 minutes because that's really. I just sat down and, oh, this would be cute. And type.
So how did it work? Was it that you had written a story, it gotten published, and they wanted it to be adapted, or you pitched it to them? Like, how did that happen?
I just sort of said, now, was this through my agent?
Yeah, they came to your agent. They
Yes.
read the story and wanted it.
Okay.
So they said, I said, okay. And so I wrote that, and they said, well, now you write a whole bunch more. And I said, no, I mean,
You didn't write that.
pardon me?
You wrote the story, not the screenplay.
Right. Oh, yeah, I didn't write the screenplay. I wrote the story. And then I wrote some screenplays, some Trek and some other stuff. Screenplay writing is, as you're probably aware, a totally different activity.
Absolutely.
And it's not easier, it's not harder, it's really different.
Right. I understand that one of them got made into a movie.
Oh, yeah. The movie business. Now, that was a wonderful chapter. Totally complicated. But basically, I was, the devil took me off on a cliff and showed me all the wonders of hell and would I like to take up residence there? And basically I said, I can see the horns poking out from under your Homburg hat. And fuck you, man.
What was the movie?
This was the first one was a Robot Jocks. Yeah, this is it's a complicated story about how I got into it, but basically, a guy I liked a lot said, "Here, if you write this story, I guarantee it'll be made into a movie." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, that'll do." I said, "Fine." And so he outlined his story to me. I said, "Boy, that's not the greatest story in the world." He says, "No, but it's yours. Take it." And so I did. And I wrote this really kind of dumb story, and they made the sets while I was writing.
Oh, geez.
It's just, and I went out to Hollywood, and they made these fucking sets.
Rome.
Pardon? We went to Rome.
Cool.
And lived like kings. I mean, for 2 graduate students.
Not bad, right?
Yeah, you go to Rome and they have a room full of movie people,
Right.
beautiful girls and swank guys and so forth. And they just spend thousands of dollars on dinner and throw a card on it. And you go, oh, wait. The card is like 2 years tuition. Bang.
Wow, very cool. Okay, that's right.
I was, here's the thing, that
Yeah.
the interesting part of this, if you can see it as kind of abstractions in action, is living in all these different worlds at once.
Yeah.
Because I was still an academic.
Right.
My brain was still working like a guy who's aware of PhDs and trends and armies of academics trying to make a living in all this. But I'm also living in this world full of movie stars and strange things like
did you get to hobnob with with anyone,
oh, not really, not real famous people, but
still
they're living in the industry, and
right.
I guess I met a couple of famous people. Well, George Lucas.
Oh, cool.
I worked with George.
Oh, yeah.
But we met he was just George, and
Right.
I didn't know he was famous while we were working at first. And then I thought, oh, wait, that's George
What?
F. Lucas.
Wait a second. What did you work what did you work with George Lucas on?
I was working for Disney, and I was just doing some stuff.
Epcot.
Yeah, for Epcot, although it hadn't really started yet.
Right.
And George came by, and we got to talking, and he's a wonderful guy. I mean, just full of enthusiasm and genius and everything. You either love him or hate him immediately, I think. And I loved him. So I don't know, the story becomes very complicated and so forth, but basically he says, well, I'm going to do this Star Wars thing, and would you like to do some writing for me? And I said, oh yeah, I guess I could.
Oh, wait, you worked on Star
Kay's going, no, it wasn't like that at
It
all.
wasn't like that, no.
But that's the
did you actually work on any part of Star Wars?
No, Star Wars actually was almost in the can when I started working for George.
Yeah.
But what specifically did you do for him?
Nothing,
Oh,
Kay says nothing.
nothing.
I never did anything for George. Wait, I did though.
You worked with him on Epcot on the space ride.
Yeah, it's
oh, I
basically.
see. Okay, I got it. Okay.
Yeah, we weren't in a movie.
No,
All
no,
right.
no.
All right, fair enough. Okay, that was great. But now it's time for a special segment where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, including a few new ones I brought out just for tonight's show. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Apocalypse, Stargazer, Music Lover, Quantum Leap, Brainiac Rockbox, Benjamin's Button, and everyone's favorite Kick 'em in the Junk. All right, I'm going to give it a whirl. Let's see what we get. You ready, Joe?
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
not sure which one of those would be.
All right, what do we got? Round and round. And you've got Benjamin's Button. I don't know why this one comes up a lot, but it does. Okay. So this one's got a little bit of a wind up, so bear with me. All right. So I'm going to give you 2 options. Much like Benjamin Button, you can live your life fully in reverse, where you are born incredibly old and you get younger and younger until you reach your cellular state. Or option 2, you can relive your life with your memories of that life intact only. Any changes that you make going back around the second time will very likely alter your life in any number of unpredictable ways, probably resulting in a new life, for better or worse, that doesn't quite look like the one that you have now. So given those 2 options, life in reverse or life do-over, which do you choose?
Life do-over.
Life do-over. All right. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So I got 3. Now you're going to pick your poison. I got 3 choices for you, A, B, and C. I'm not going to tell you what's behind each door. We'll get to as many as we can with the time we got. So A, B, or C?
B.
C? Oh,
B. I don't
B.
care.
No, B. Okay. All right. That one's old dog, new tricks. So the saying goes that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Yet every writer I know, including myself, has made numerous mistakes along the way in their writing careers. What's one mistake you made in your writing career that hurt like hell at the time, but you learned from and endeavored never to make again?
Something that hurt and every time. Well, I guess without going into personalities, it would be doing things for money. Doing things for not enough money.
See.
So I mean, nobody ever offered me jillions of dollars for doing something, but I've been places where I took a job because the people around me envied me for getting it, and wow, you get to go make this movie. I did these adventure novels about Attar the Merman. And I thought the whole idea was just stupid fucking, but guaranteed money.
Right.
And it was a foot in the door.
Right.
Possible movie stuff, la, 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 la. And I enjoyed it. And I just typed it up with the speed of light and had a wonderful time, and got to travel and, and see starlets and stuff like that and everything. But I guess I was lucky that I didn't go too far in that direction.
All right, fair enough. All right.
Because at the same time, I was getting academic recognition, and
Okay.
I finally decided I'd rather have the professors on my side than the starlets.
Okay, fair enough. All right, now we're going to go to our advice column. What's the best and worst writing advice you've ever been given?
Oh, the best and worst. The worst would be the easiest, I guess. Now, what was the worst advice I ever got? I don't know why both of those are almost impossible to answer, because the best advice I got, I suppose, would be when I was at a writer's workshop in Milford, Pennsylvania in 1970. And some people said, watch out for this. This is really poisonous because it can turn you into a workshop writer and blah, 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 and so on. And other people were saying, hey, this is connections that you can't make any other way. And I went with them, and I wound up moving to Florida, because that's where the gods were pointing. And so I went down to Florida, actually at the urging of Keith Laumer and Damon Knight and Kate Wilhelm. And all of them turned out to be influences, mostly good. Gay says, yeah, right. But sort of, I guess many people find there's a turning point in their life, if they're writers or artists, when they just have to dive in and say, okay, I'm going to see whether this works at all, but I'm going to just do it.
Right.
And that was the thing for us, because I still had connections in science and engineering, and there are all sorts of places I could go. But I just decided I was going to be a writer. And we actually, Gay and I talked about it and said, well, we'll do this for 2 years. And if after 2 years we don't think it's great, let's go back to science. And after 2 years, I was really solid, so I stayed in the writing game. So far, 40 years later, it's still working.
So far, so good. All right, fair enough. All right. So now I'm going to give you some truth serum. I got 10 questions. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Favorite flavor ice cream?
I love all ice cream, but I guess I'll say butter brickle.
Butter brickle. Okay, that's a new one. I haven't heard that one before. All right. What's one food you will never eat ever for any reason?
Oh man. What is the name of it? It's a Spanish food. Durian.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
You don't want to go near it. It's a fruit which smells like rotting flesh.
Okay, good tip. All right. Bucket list destination anywhere in the world.
If I could go anywhere,
Anywhere.
well, I can, of course. So, I'd probably go back to Spain.
Where?
Probably the north.
Okay. If you could have,
I don't know. Any place that speaks Spanish. And
fair enough. All right. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Immortality.
Interesting. Do you play any musical instruments? And if not, which one, if you could?
I do play guitar.
Okay. What
Clarinet and saxophone and so forth.
Oh, okay. Cats or dogs?
I love both, but I own cats. I mean, I'm a cat person, basically.
Yeah, same here. Favorite cocktail?
I don't drink.
What's your unwind beverage?
Oh, tea.
Okay.
I love exotic tea, and I'm a tea nut.
A T-nut. All right. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever, any seat, any venue, any time in history. What's your choice?
I'd be conventional and I want to see Mozart play Mozart.
Where?
Oh, where?
Anywhere?
Vienna.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. If you could get a continuation of any canceled TV show ever, what would it be?
That would be difficult. I don't know that much about TV.
Oh, okay.
I live in a TV universe like every American, but maybe I guess I'd go back to Lost.
Lost. You know, I rewatched the whole show during the pandemic. And
Really? Wow.
I got to tell you, at the time that I watched it, because of where we were, we physically were trapped. I was trapped. I spent most of my time literally right in that chair behind you.
Wow.
Being able to spend like 3 months watching it with their, like, with these beautiful people running outside in this beautiful jungle and the ocean. It was like exactly what I needed.
Wonderful. Wow.
All right. We're going to take a couple of questions from the audience if we have any. I don't see anything in the chat box, but I did want to ask quickly. Talk to me just a little bit about, because I read also of yours not so long ago, when you wrote The Accidental Time Machine, which took us on quite a journey. What inspired that novel? And what, if anything, were you hoping to say about the nature of time?
Give me a minute to run to the bathroom. And
Go,
then I'll
go for it. Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Because this is very time machine-ish. Yeah.
Okay. All right, folks. So we got a couple more minutes, folks. As soon as he comes back, we're going to wrap up. So if you have any questions you have for Joe, just pop them in the chat box and I'll get to a couple. Okay. I hope everyone's doing okay out there. Joe's quite the character. I'm really glad we had a chance to sit down with him. And I'll also ask for anyone who's watching the show right now, if you like the show, if this is your first time, or if you've seen my show before, I'll ask you to subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep that going, because if you like what I'm doing, I want to keep going. And it's been a good run so far. All right, let's see. I got a couple more things for Joe, and then here we go. No questions. Right, I'm showing you match. Oh, good. First time here. Mary M, thank you. Good. I hope you like it. All right, and I will ask Gay to pop in to say hello. So how's that? All right. So Gay, we got someone's asking you just to pop if you want to say hi.
Yes, here I come. I'm coming around the table. I want you to meet the
right,
cat.
Who do we got?
This is little Ada. We inherited her when my sister-in-law passed away last year. We didn't want a cat, and now we don't know what life would be like without it.
How old is she?
3.
3. Oh, okay. That's why I was a cat person my whole life. My wife is a dog person, but when we met, I had a cat, and she kept saying, "I want a dog." I said, "Here's the deal." My cat at the time, Alex, I said, when he needs to have his full run. When he's gone, we can get a dog. And Alex lived to be 18. So then, but at the time that we met, he was about 15. So, so we got a dog, had him run. Now we have another dog, Jinx. I can hear her now. She's upstairs. She's a black lab. She's barking. We're talking about trying to get a cat also and merge the cat and the dog, but that's always a little bit of a tenuous situation. So we'll see how that goes.
I want to do that.
Yeah, I gotta I'm jonesing to have a cat, and I haven't had one in a long time. After having them my whole life, I miss it. And my kid, I have 12-year-old twins. They both want a cat. So
good luck. Well, Joe and I have been together for 61 years.
61 years. Wow, that's amazing.
For 57.
Wow.
And I'm still speaking, and here he's back.
All right, Joe, just in time. Gay was she was just about to take over your entire interview. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna just hang on for a second, folks. Joe, we got real quick. The question for you is, what is your favorite science fiction novel?
The Star Is My Destination. Alfred Pfister.
Okay. So I just want to go back real quick, Joe. We were talking about The Accidental Time Machine.
Yeah.
So what was the inspiration for the novel, and what, if anything, did you want to say about the nature of time?
Wow, what was the inspiration? You know what? I got that. The inspiration for that was sitting in the Ernest Hemingway Museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was just doing sort of free-for-all research, just fiddling with various novel ideas. And I had a couple of weeks to just live like a deranged academic. And that's what I did. And basically, that's when the accidental time machine came. And it came to me actually just as I left that wonderful academic thing.
Right.
I took a train back down to Florida,
Mhm.
and I believe I drank a bit. And I just sat in the train with a notebook, and I wrote like a madman,
Mhm.
and started drinking brandy and writing and
Oh, I know that feeling.
uh, and basically by the end of that, I had some 25 pages of handwriting that became the accidental time machine.
Well, it was trippy. I definitely didn't know where it was going, and I was glad that I read it. So I'm going to share my screen, folks. Just give me 1 second, and we're going to kind of wrap things up here. All right, Joe. So obviously we talked about it a little bit before. So the Forever War. Now that it's been, obviously this came out in what, about 75, something like that?
Yeah, 74.
74. So you're coming up on, it's almost 50 years.
Yeah.
Does the Forever War, is it still, to you, is it the crowning achievement of your career? Is it just one novel in a very long list? Like, what does it mean to you now, almost 50 years later?
Well, it's very much buried in my past, but I have to, I'm always be reminded of it, and they're always making movie pitches and this and that and the other thing. So it's an almost daily intrusion in my life. But I've got all sorts of other things that concern me in a literary way.
Fair enough. All right, Joe, that was great. As for me, since I'll stick a little bit with the sci-fi war theme. I'll encourage everyone to check out my space opera Crossline. So the impetus for the novel is modern day space pilot is testing out warp thrusters, and if they work, it's going to revolutionize warp travel as we know it. But for reasons I will not explain, our pilot is forced into a wormhole, and he ends up in a parallel Earth, and he's caught at a tipping point. That's either the civilization is either going to survive, or it's going to completely collapse into a civil war. And it turns out that the pilot may actually have been destined for being there in the first place. However, back on our Earth in the early 1950s, a dead broke, uneducated gas attendant from Nowheresville, Texas, tumbleweeds and all, stumbles into an oil well, and he becomes the richest man in the world. And over decades, he uses that wealth to finance a private space program, which ultimately launches our original pilot. And over the course of the novel, you learn how their two lives intersect. And for those of you who are wondering, I can assure you there's lots of the ladies in this book have a very, very robust role here, and I can say that they make all the difference. All right, and so Crossline is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, that's our show. Joe, I want to thank you so much for stopping by, and to Gay. It was absolutely great. I loved it. I could have gone on, and I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. And if you want to see me in person, I will be at Heliosphere in Piscataway, New Jersey, the weekend of April 28th. And until then, I will see you all next week. Take care. Thanks a lot, Joe. This was absolutely great. Thanks so much. All right. That was great.
Yeah.
Okay. And that, as they say,